Good evening, everyone. I'm giving just a few more seconds for our official start time of 7:30. I just wanted to be on time for certain. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining with me on day two of my 30-day event, which will be looking at varied facets of maternal mortality, trying to delve into some issues that can be related to the number of maternal deaths that we're seeing in the United States, and to also help to prepare families to look at what they're able to do in anticipation of having a baby. It's more than just thinking about having a baby, but to get the kinds of outcomes that you're wanting to have, it requires a bit of homework. So I'm hoping that the broadcast that I do will assist you in that way. Our desire is healthy mom, healthy baby, and healthy family. Last night was our first night, and we reviewed maternal mortality in the United States and discussed how for all of the population in the United States, the maternal mortality ratio has increased. But for Black women, it is over twice the amount it is for other women in our country. And this is pushing the maternal mortality rate in the United States, is really pushing us to really take a look and stand up and say, what is going on? It is outpacing the maternal mortality rate for other industrialized countries. And so we took a look at that. We also talked about how one of the findings of the Maternal Mortality Review Committee in Washington, D.C., was structural racism was the underlying cause for the deaths that had occurred here in Washington, D.C. Tonight and tomorrow, we're going to look at racism in medicine. And it's important for us to take a look at this and why. When one goes into a hospital facility, they're asked to sign pre admission forms, which will include consent forms for care. And one needs to be very careful what they are signing. Those consent forms can be very general. And in essence, when you sign that form, you can be providing consent for things that you may not have intended to do. I'm going to give some history as to how that has occurred in our history as Black people in the United States. So I'm going to have a small presentation with this as we go, and hope that this will be helpful to you. So we talked a little bit again. This first slide is looking at what we discussed last evening in regard to the maternal death rates in the United States. And as you can see, when you're age 40 and over, it has gone up exponentially. But let's move from that and look at some of our history. It is well known that the American slave trade has undergone lots of horrors. And what we don't talk about so much is the horrors that happened to slaves in regard to their medical and health care, or lack, let's say more lack of. When slaves were a part of the Middle Passage coming over in the United States, the slave owners could claim them as insurance commodities. And so when people would become sick on the ship, they would essentially toss you over. You're basically property anyway. But along with that tossing over, they were able to claim that with their insurance and therefore get money paid back to them for that insurance loss. The other is that when slaves were on the ship, they were often forced to take medication. Medicine was not always seen as a helpful thing by the slaves. because medicine was not always used to treat or heal. Medicine was also used to punish and to embarrass and to humiliate. Examples of that include the following: laxatives were given to people as a means of punishment. And in the very close quarters that the slaves had, these laxatives were given purposefully so that they were defecating on each other. Medication to be able to calm nausea or to induce vomiting was given to the slaves as a means of entertainment, so that they could give this medication to them. They would vomit, and it would be a source of laughter, entertainment for the slave owner's family. It makes you sick when you think of these things. The other is it was the slave owner and his wife who made decisions related to the health care of the slaves, deciding whether or not they needed medication, would they get medication. And oftentimes they never saw a physician unless their lives were very much on the line. The slave owner did not want to lose the slave because that was workforce for them. But the whole agency, the person's ability to request medication, to have medication, was taken away, was in the hands of the slave holder. Therefore, you had no options. Luckily, thankfully, there was a lot of herbal medicine known for those who came over, and that was practiced. But in terms of the official medicine, that was not made available in a way that would be healing. The other is that at times, if slaves were not wanting to take the medication, they were whipped. It was given to them at gunpoint. And so one doesn't come away from that experience feeling like, well, I really want to take this medication. And so that's important to understand, how that loss of the ability to control what's happening, what's put into your body, that effect that it had on our ancestors. What we don't hear a lot about, I think others who are older than us know very much about this. And this is that the bodies of newly buried Black men and women were used by medical schools around the country, also in Europe, as cadavers for their medical education. And as the medical trade increased, there were fewer bodies for cadavers for them to learn. And so it's known. You can see here, this is a newspaper article in regard to graves were being robbed, Black cemeteries were being robbed, so that the medical schools would have cadavers. Keep in mind that there was absolutely no information given to the family or consent obtained from the family. And this continued on into the early 1900s and even further in. So we have provided, our bodies have been used for the advancement of medical education. How that's also happened is with the Tuskegee syphilis study, which I think many in the audience have a better understanding of this. Keep in mind that this was a study that was done by the United States government, the public health services of the United States government. This occurred in the 1930s was when this began. And for more than 40 years, this continued on until this was discovered by a journalist. And it was the journalist who reported this. And then, oh my goodness, there was, the horror. When this was known that this was happening. What happened in the Tuskegee syphilis study was that the goal of the study was to see what would be the natural outcome of, or what would happen in the human body if syphilis was allowed to take its natural course and was not treated. Keep in mind that during the time of this study that penicillin became available, and penicillin is the chief means for treating syphilis. But this was not given to these men. These were 400 sharecropper men. And rather than treat them, it was more important that we saw what can happen if we allow this disease to run its course. If you don't know, syphilis can result in mental illness if you allow it to go through the varied stages of syphilis. I'm sitting here just kind of like, oh my gosh, this is what's happened. One other that we have is with Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks is a Black woman, 31 years of age, who was treated at Johns Hopkins University Hospital in the 1930s for cervical cancer. And when we talk about the term biopsy, what that means is that we're taking a small amount of tissue from your body, placing it in the lab to allow the cells in that tissue to grow to see what is going to become and what's actually in those cells. Most times, the cells will replicate themselves a few times and then they will die. However, with Henrietta Lacks, instead of her cells dying, they continued to regenerate themselves, to reproduce themselves. And hers was seen as an infinite, like, reproduction that would never end. So when this was discovered, her cells, once more, without her knowledge, her family's knowledge, her consent, or that of her family, was shared with laboratories throughout the world. Throughout the world. She has been recognized by the World Health Organization. Her cells are what's known as HeLa cells. She has been recognized as being kind of the breakthrough for modern medicine. And why is that? Her cells were used to make the polio vaccine. Her cells have been used for the development of the human papilloma virus, which is vaccine, which is used to help prevent cervical cancer. Her cells have been used for so when couples are not able to have children, they will go through in vitro fertilization. Her cells have been used to assist with that technology. Her cells were used for the development of COVID-19 vaccine. In 2021, I believe, or 2017, we're talking 2020s. Her entire human genome, and when we talk about human genome, that is like the entire map of your body in terms of its cellular level, down to the DNA, the RNA, everything was published by a laboratory in Germany. Her family sued for that. And then more recently, this is the 2021 incident, more recently, a biotechnology lab in Massachusetts had sold her cells again without the family's knowledge, without the family's consent. We're now talking 70 years from the time when those cells were first taken from her body, that this is still, her cells are still being used. And while these companies have made billions of dollars, her family has yet to receive any compensation. They have received no money at all. They do sit on the board of the NIH to make determination about which companies would be granted the privilege to use her cells. But this is still going on. And this is all because, again, back in the 1930s, she had a procedure done in which tissue was taken and continued, more tissue was taken without her knowledge, without her consent, and is being profited from by these labs around the world. So, this is part one. I felt that it was enough to just talk about these issues right here. Um, when I was looking at this, I hadn't heard all of this. Tomorrow, we're going to talk more in terms of what has happened with women in regard to the development of the whole field of gynecology, how slave women contributed to that, and also the issues around forced sterilization. And forced sterilization, by the way, remains legal in this country and in other countries. And so that's what I have to offer to you tonight. I felt like that's enough. I've had emotional reactions to this knowledge. And so that's what I have to offer. So I would leave this open to see if there's anything that's happened in the chat at all, to see if we would like to have any conversation around this, and we will close at 8 p.m. sharp. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. Thank you. I'm going to take a look now to see if anything has come. Okay. Not seeing anything. Thank you so much for your time. We will join again tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. and then we will have part two of medical experimentation with race. Thank you.